So how do we get these numbers? Where do they come from? Where do these cash flow numbers come from? So I want us to start to think about this. When we forecast, the first thing we're going to forecast will be our revenues. And then we're going to think about some forecast ratios to forecast expenses. And we're going to move forward for a little bit. Let me make this a little smaller. So I want to think about some of this. And let me just kind of fast forward here in some of my projections. Okay, that's what I thought. So I told you I was going to kind of move forward to this time signature. Just I wanted to show you something. Now I'm going to move back a little bit and talk about how we would apply things to the time signature. So I said that we would talk about relationship between growth and ROIC, and we talk about sources of this ROIC and growth. So let's talk about those for a few minutes. Remind me what return on invested capital stands for and what it represents to us. Andrew, any ideas? You're on mute, buddy. You're still on mute, Andrew. Okay, Taylor, return on invested capital. What's it mean to you?
Well, it's like the percentage of money I'm going to make off of the money that I put into the system.
Okay. And if you have a return of 10% this year on your invested capital, and let's remind ourselves what the equation is. That's no plat, which is one of our cash flow variables, right? Divided by invested capital. If that's 10% this year and it's 10% next year, then we know one of a couple of things. Either there was no growth in the company's no plat and no growth in their invested capital, or the invested capital and no plat grew at the same rate. Right? Okay. So if they continued to be the same ROIC. One of you started to ask a question. I cut you off. I apologize.
I was just thinking about the equation. Could it also be that they moved in the opposite direction?
No, that would be that would give us a very different return on invested capital. If no plat got bigger and invested capital got smaller, then our return on invested capital value would become very different.
Yeah, you're right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you're going to hear me use a term a lot, and that term is constant returns to scale. Does anyone know what that term means? Constant returns to scale.
Out of the return that's relative to the overall amount?
Yes. What's the constant part of this? Okay. Michael's right, though. It's the return to the overall amount. So as we look at this, if our returns to scale are constant, they don't change. If I had a 10% return today, and next year it's 10%, and the year afterwards it's 10%, and the year afterwards it's 10%, this is not my growth factor. This is my return. Well, think of return as return on invested capital. It's my no plat divided by invested capital. And if it's 10% today, if that's my return, my ROIC, if it's 10% today, and if my company is growing, then that means my invested capital is growing at the same rate that my no plat is growing, in order for the relationship between no plat and invested capital to be 10%, right?
So it's when your input and increases essentially is equal to the input and outcreases.
Yeah.
Is that a word?
Exactly, Mandy.
Output, not outcreases, sorry.
I know, we knew what you meant. We knew what you meant.
Outcreases.
Yeah, we like that. That's a new term. You'll have to coin that and make some money on it, Taft. Okay. So think about this. we know we want our company to grow, right? When our company gets bigger, we as stakeholders become wealthier. And that's not a problem for us. We want it to get bigger. But we find that as our company gets bigger, our return as a percentage, not as a nominal dollar value, but as a percentage, may stay the same. Well, if that's the case, we believe then that our returns to scale being the size of the company, our returns to scale are constant. As the company's getting bigger, our percentage rate of return stays constant, which means the profit being generated from the company is getting bigger at the same rate that the company is getting bigger. And so our returns are constant as a percentage, not as a nominal dollar value, as a percentage. Okay? I want to look at Marijuana real quick to show you some of this. And I'm about to take you into a sheet that you're just going to say, oh, please don't ever make me replicate that, but you're going to. Here we have year 2019, 20, and so on for Marijuana. And the values I have for year 2019 are coming straight out of the financial statement. I'm hoping that's big enough so you can read it. Let me make sure it is. So to see how I'm getting my revenue, I'm pulling it from the financial statement. You can see that's coming right out of the financial statement. So it's referencing the financial statement right here. Okay? And in this case, all of these values are coming right out of my financial statement workbook. And I have a return on invested capital of 25.98%. You will remember that. You calculated that in the financial statement. And this rate is constant, which would suggest that we have a constant return, even though the scale of the company, as measured by its revenues, is getting bigger, as measured by its invested capital is getting bigger, as measured by its no-plat or its free cash flow is getting bigger. The return is constant. So we have constant returns regardless of what's happening to the scale of the company. Company gets bigger, 25.98%. Company stays the same, 25.98%. Company gets smaller, 25.98%. The return is constant regardless of what's happening to our scale. That's how we see constant returns to scale.
So that return, though, it's constant relative to the previous year, but it's growing relative to the initial investment, right?
Well, the nominal value of it, Michael, is growing. The relational relative percentage relationship is what's constant. The nominal value, free cash flow, is changing.
Right.
The nominal value of no plat, nominal value of EBIT, all these others are changing. They're all changing at the exact same rate. So we have a constant overall return. Okay? Well, we'd love to think that businesses could grow at an increasing return to scale. So as the revenue grows, maybe the profits grow even faster, in which case we would see ROIC getting bigger. We don't want our company to grow at a decreasing return. We don't want to have it such that as we get bigger, the return, though it's still positive, is getting smaller as a percentage. And it may even be that it's getting smaller as a percentage even when the numbers could be getting bigger, because it's all relational. The numerator and the denominator, it's relational, it's a ratio, it's a percentage, it's relative. Okay? So you're going to hear me use this term constant returns to scale a lot, and changing returns. Changing can be increasing, it can be decreasing. I will tell you that even though we might think of this and say, you know, here we've got Lisa's business, Curless Enterprises, and it's a small business, Lisa, and you would expect that as you get bigger, you don't need an additional CEO. You may not need another office until the company's triple or quadruple in value. So you would think you should be able to have an improving percentage of profit, right? And that improving percentage would be an increasing return to scale. And it would be rational to think that you can achieve that. Or Taylor's company, which is big. It's a multinational behemoth. And Shenzhen's company means worth billions of dollars. You would think that we should be able to achieve increasing returns. But in fact, for whatever reason, we find that that's become difficult for us. And our return on capital may have remained constant. We actually find that companies, on the whole, tend to grow at a constant rate. Even though we have all these reasons in the world that that shouldn't be the case, we have history that tells us it pretty much is the case. Okay? Well, let's talk about how we forecast some of this. I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint to do this. We forecast things by looking at endogenous growth factors and exogenous growth factors. So I want to think about this for a few minutes. What would be an endogenous growth factor? How might we consider endogeneity here? Any ideas? Endogenous means organic. What would be an organic growth factor of Archibald Enterprises, Carol? Any ideas?
No.
Process improvement or something?
Say again, Mandy?
What about like a process improvement?
Yep. So it came from within the company, right? Maybe a process improvement, increase in sales because we decided to expand into the West Coast, an increase in revenue because we have some products coming out of R&D, an improvement in revenue and expense because we have this marketing campaign that was released in social media that's very cost effective. Those would all be internal sources of growth, right? Those would be endogenous. What then would be exogenous or coming from outside of our system?
Maybe more customers. More
Say again,
customers.
please.
More customers.
So where do the small customers come from, Diana? They come from our efforts to create them, or they come because we bought them or somebody gave them to us?
Like an acquisition, would that be?
An acquisition would be from the outside, right? Who said that, by the way? I heard it. Thank you, Carol. So we can grow organically. We can, as a team, say, you know what? We're going to put some money into marketing. We're going to put another warehouse west or east of the Mississippi. We're going to bring this product out of R&D that we've been baking for the last couple of years. And that's all organic to the work that we've been doing, right? So that's endogenous. Exogenous or inorganic would be things we create from outside of us. So maybe M&A transactions, mergers and acquisitions. I could bring in more revenue, more expense, but still at a higher profit if I bought Mario's company. It's exogenous to my system for Archibald or Haskell Enterprises. Or maybe another exogenous factor would be something like a macroeconomic condition. We have a little bit of an exogenous factor we're living with today, don't we? In January, December, we would never have expected 30 to 40% unemployment. A shock that we have not controlled from outside of our system has brought that about. We think of those kinds of big external shocks as being exogenous. We think of interest rate changes as being exogenous. They may not be a big external shock. Why is it that an interest rate change that happens by our own Federal Reserve, why would it be thought of as being as exogenous? Any ideas?
It affects the way in which you can borrow money. It affects maybe cost of goods. It affects all sorts of things.
Those are all true, but what makes that exogenous, Michael?
Or people's ability to buy, or I don't, maybe it's outside of your control.
It's outside of our control. The decision to change interest rates happens at the Federal Reserve level, right? Chair of the Federal Reserve, the Board of Governors, they get together, they decide, should we raise rates, should we keep them constant? Now, do they take all kinds of influences? Certainly they do. But David, did they call you and ask you for your opinion?
Sometimes I wish they would.
Good point, right? Andrew, they didn't ask for yours either, by the way. Okay, or Michael Allen's, they were never elected by us. They are not an endogenous body. It's exogenous. It's imposed on us by policymakers. Well, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, by the way. Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it's bad. David apparently hasn't liked it all the time. I get that. Hey, I had my first house when mortgage interest rates were like 17%. Do you think I liked Paul Volcker, who was the chair of the Fed at the time? I'd have just soon thrown darts at the guy, right? So we all like these sometimes, but it was completely out of our control. Didn't happen as a function of our internal system. Okay?
I have a question. I still don't understand why customers are not exogenous, because you can't control the number of people who will buy your product or something. I don't think you bring them from the inside.
Where'd they come from?
From the street? I don't know.
Okay, sort of. Let's say, Diana, I'm a customer of yours. I buy Diana shoes for my wife. She loves them, by the way. She's all over them. Okay? How'd you get me? Did I just appear out of the ethos?
You might be you might be passing, and then you saw an advertisement or
Advertisement. Who put up the advertisement?
we did.
Yes. And you were advertising a shoe that you created at a price that you decided on. It's endogenous. I exist as your customer because I ethereally existed as a human being as some coordinated matter. But I became your customer because of your efforts, right? Now maybe my wife's tastes and preferences, but your efforts. Does that make sense? It's endogenous, okay? Think about anything that the firm creates of its own power and accord as endogenous. Endogenous growth takes time. Somebody had to create the ad campaign, had to get it approved by Diana and the senior vice presidents, had to get it out on Madison Avenue or Facebook or whatever, had to let some time take place for it to percolate in the system before I walked by the billboard, saw it, and decided to buy a Diana shoe for my wife. It takes time. But I didn't have to go out and spend a gazillion dollars buying Michael Enterprises, which already had Rick as a customer. Okay, that would have been fast, right? Michael, if I was buying your shoes for my wife, and if Diana bought your company, she would have bought me as a customer as well. That's exogenous. Yes, it's because you chose it, but Diana's, or rather Michael Allen's company is where it came from. Okay? That's a merger acquisition. So things from outside of the microcosm of our company are exogenous. Federal Reserve, something happening in trade policies, something happening with oil prices decided by cartels, etc. Mergers and acquisitions, as it turns out, will give us a very rapid change in revenue, won't it? But it comes at a big cost. So all of these different factors, including the customer level, the supplier level, the macroeconomic level, the local level, the R&D from inside of our firm, the taste and preferences from outside of our firm, all of these things conspire to help us understand what next year's revenues might be like. So when I'm trying to figure out what revenues are going to look like for Haskell Enterprises next year, I go to Jason, who's the Senior Vice President over marketing, and I have him reach out to our biggest customers. And I go to Mario, who's in charge of our supply chain and where our new innovative products are coming from, and have him tell me what's coming out of the pipeline in terms of new products. I go to Kylie, who's responsible for acquisition of new firms to add to us. I go to Carol, and so on and so on. And then together we put all of these influences in the hat, if you will, and I come up with what I believe next year's growth is going to look like. And then we do it for the year after, and we do it for the year after. And if we try to do it for the year after that, Shenzhen opens up and says, wait a minute, guys, I don't know that we can forecast out that far. I don't know what the customers are going to be looking for because I don't know what Mario's going to bring out of out of production that year, or I don't know how many new customers Kylie really can get, it starts to become less credible. And that's when I move from the explicit to the continuation, or discrete to terminal time structures. Does that make sense? I'll show you an example in a few minutes. I'll put some numbers to it. I know that always makes it a little bit easier, okay? So now let me move to a spreadsheet to look at this. I'm going to tell you that here we have for Marriage Ravana. And we have sat down and we have determined, those of us that are very important in the Marriage Ravana enterprise hierarchy, and we have identified that the market in which our products exist, you might remember Marriage Ravana is a consulting company, an economic consulting company. We have identified by looking at trade publications, by looking at market trends, we've identified that the market for economic consultants is going to grow at approximately 14% a year for the next 5 years. So we put that figure up at 14%. Whatever reason, Carol has convinced us that we are one of the more important players in the economic consulting marketplace, certainly in Eastern Europe, which happens to be true for this company. And so we're going to get more of that growth than the market as an average is going to get. We're a quality player, we're a quality leader. So even though the market's expected to grow at 14%, Carol has been able to identify that we should be able to get more than that. In fact, she's tracked our growth for the last number of years and seen that we tend to grow at about 2% more than the market because we're a recognized leader in terms of quality, output, and such. So we're going to add that to it. And remember, Mario was responsible for new product introductions. We're coming out with a couple of new types of consulting products and contracts. We're hiring some additional types of consultants. And Mario and his people believe that we're going to have about an additional 11% growth next year because of these new products coming about. We may be selling to the exact same customers, maybe attracting some new customers as well, but it's going to give us about 11% growth in revenue next year. And then, I can't remember who this was, maybe it was Kylie, I think it was Kylie, said, yes, and we're also opening another office in London, and we're going to start to sell our products and services to the London business market. And she believes that's going to give us another 4% in overall revenue growth. Well, if I can believe all of you guys, and I'm going to believe you at the moment, if I can believe you, I've got a 31% overall growth rate in my revenue next year because of my forecasting of each of these elements. I believe I'm going to see 31% revenue growth next year. Does that seem like a reasonable figure? Bella, does 31% growth sound high or common or what?
That seems pretty high, honestly.
Yeah, I agree.
Andrew, what do you think? Smoking hot, right?
Sign me up.
I know, I want
Can you
that.
hear me?
I can now.
Okay, yeah, high. Really, really, I mean, too high to be true.
Well, too hot. What does that mean? If it's credible, if we have orders for this, if we have history and pattern, if we actually have made the expansion plans, is it unrealistic? Well, no. I mean, I got the best minds I know, frankly, the highest paid people in the company together. We came up with these numbers, and we've always been pretty accurate before, but it's awfully hot, isn't it, Andrew? So it might even stretch credibility a little bit. Regardless, it is what it is. So how do I apply it? Well, I believe we're going to see that growth rate for a number of years. So I start with the revenue in my base period. This was 2019. I got that from looking at my financial statement. And I went ahead and I expanded my revenue in 2020 by that 31%, which I see way over here, okay? I expand it from the base year to the next year. And I expanded it to next year. And I expanded it to next year. This is why Andrew thinks it's a little bit hot, because the compounding effect of 31% doesn't take very long until we've more than doubled, right? Compounding effect of 31% is pretty smoking hot. And it's hard to keep up with that kind of growth. But if in fact we believe it's credible and we have the capital behind us to do it, maybe we can reach it. So we are forecasting our revenue, in this case, based upon some assumed values that we put our best credible minds together and come up with. And we're going to then move forward our revenues based on that growth rate. And it just gets us our revenues. And here in the very last year of it, now our growth rate is moving forward from that moment on at 2.5%. So a very different number, right? 2.5%. Why did we move it to 2.5%? Because we couldn't look ourselves in the mirror and say 31% any further. So do you understand how I get these numbers? Any question about it?
So for year one in 2020, so you did 273. Okay.
And I expanded it by 1 plus the growth rate, which I have over there. I have in cell D12.
Okay.
No, I've got it down, excuse me, I had it replicated right down here in D20.
Okay.
And here, I just repeated it from where I had it stored way over here in the corner. Just so I
Okay.
can see it. Okay?
Thank you.
Well, that's easy enough. We can say that if we believe the growth rate is going to be 31% for every year following 2019 all the way through 2024, that's easy enough. And then in the next year, year 6 or 2025, it's going to slow way down to 2.5%.